Following this conversation with Jamie Moul, Jamie was world number one amateur, played in the Walker Cup in 2007, also won the Brabazon and the Lytham Trophy before he turned pro and then played on the European Tour. Jamie is an awesome golfer. He's someone that I've known of for many years growing up in Suffolk. And in this conversation, we talk about his time on tour, what he did really well, what he reflects on, what he may do differently, and then also get into what he does now as a putting coach. And we get really nice and geeky around how to improve your putting. Hope you enjoy, and a big thanks to Jamie for coming on. I've known you for many years, as we just talked about off camera. But for people who haven't heard of you, do you want to give a couple of minute brief overview of your golfing career to date?
Okay, so predominantly from a playing background, straight out of school, full-time golf. Obviously went up through the stages, county level, did all right there, stepped up, sort of every time won or progressed, stepped up to the next stage. Got into the England setup pretty young, got down to sort of +5 as an amateur. Amateur wins wise, had Lytham Trophy, Brabazon, the two sort of big amateur wins. Representing England through all of that. Walker Cup was the sort of culmination of my amateur career. So 2007 Walker Cup. Turned pro just after that. Played 2 or 3 years Challenge Tour. And then got my card through finishing top 10 on the Challenge Tour for European Tour. Played 1 full season European Tour, a couple of seasons either side of that, sort of scrapping around trying to retain card, get card back, etc. Then sort of played a couple of seasons mini tours after that, and that's when the coaching started a bit more and sort of moved into the coaching side of things now.
That's awesome. You've been very humble. You've covered a lot of achievements in that time. So I think from memory, you were one of the first players ever to get down to +5, or did you get to +6?
Yeah, +5 was lowest I got. So +4.8 in the old world.
And then you're world number one for it's about 17 weeks.
Yeah, got to world number one 2007. I think the Lytham Trophy win got me to world number one, if I remember rightly. And yeah, so that was early stages of world amateur golf rankings. And yeah, managed to stay there for a fair bit, which is nice.
That's unreal. What's your memories of playing golf at that time? Did it feel easy and you felt like you were absolutely flying? Or did it still feel like a challenge even when you're +5 and best amateur in the world?
No, I think I was quite lucky in that it didn't feel like a challenge, but I quite enjoyed the practice side of things. And I quite enjoyed the sort of work that went along with it. So I think that was probably where I was quite lucky. That didn't feel like a chore in any way whatsoever. It was like actually I enjoyed the process of trying to improve, trying to get better, competing. I think that was probably a key, but I enjoyed competing. Yeah, I mean, golf's one of the games where you're never going to be on it all the time. So I think I was quite good at realising that and being able to just let the bad ones go. I'd have the little blow up like everyone does, but I was good at sort of blowing up, letting it go, getting on with the next one. So I think in that sense, it felt like it was easy and free flowing for me.
And it's one of the reasons I wanted to get you on and kind of share your experience. So, yeah, won the Brab, Lytham, played all 4 days Walker Cup.
Yep.
So impressive as an amateur. So, like, what is that preparation and mindset? What did you do before the events that kind of helped you? And then what was your mindset in the event that, reflecting back, was probably one of the reasons you were successful?
So I think tournament prep wise, I think because of all the England training stuff and the sort of the coaching side of things, it was very clear that I sort of had a technical practice time, and then leading into an event that changed to much more target focused stuff and almost tournament prepping, that actually scoring drills, playing stuff, as opposed to practice, technical, right up. That didn't work for me. Some players that may work for, but I found what worked for me. And I think that was the key bit there, is I found what worked. I found how I got myself into the best playing mode. Bizarrely, each season I seem to have sort of very similar periods of the year that I played well. So it's about working out kind of why and what led to that point. I always remember sort of early, so probably like my late teens, I seem to always perform pretty well and get into form around sort of open pre-qualifying round. So it would have been late May, early June, that kind of time of year. And it just seemed to be when I seemed to have a little peak. So it's about kind of figuring out how and why I got to that point. And I think it was that sort of April, May crossover when I started to play a bit more and take my practice away from the technical and get into more playing, scoring, ball flight as opposed to technical swing. What am I doing?
That's interesting because I suppose, like this classical periodization is you like take the winter, try and work on your game.
Mm-hmm.
In England, we don't have, well, round our way, we have a couple of golf courses that stay dry, but we're a bit limited
Yeah,
in terms of, beautiful conditions to go practice in. So you kind of feel like it was that technical work and then you had some skill dev stuff that
yeah,
then got you ready for the event.
yeah.
Why do you think you struggled to maintain it? So because we see this in all players, they kind of peak in certain points, but why do you think the golf then tailed off as you got to like July, August time, as a general thing?
I think I needed quite clear times. I think I was, and then this I kind of took this into my pro stuff as well. I knew I could only really do 3 weeks in a row, and I kind of got a bit of a mental burnout after that, where I found myself sometimes trying to push it and chase it a bit. And if I week 3 and week 4 particularly, I noticed that I wasn't that bothered. So I'd be on the course and I'd start making mistakes and it didn't bother me so much. I wasn't really I just wasn't in it as much by week 3, week 4. So I knew I had to schedule myself 2 weeks on, 3 weeks on max. I need a week off. So I think, again, that's where I was quite good during amateur days. There were certain events that I never went and played. I never went and played the Welsh amateur, I don't think. Very rarely played the Scottish amateur because that just didn't fit in my schedule and I knew I wouldn't be able to play all of them. So I almost had to go, but I'm not going to go and play that. Big events at the time and in sort of the amateur circuit, but it didn't fit into my schedule around possibly the bigger events that I was trying to schedule myself for. So the Brab, the Lytham Trophy, the St Andrews Links, the British Amateur, they all took priority. So I kind of geared in towards them. So yeah, I think knowing that sort of knowing your performance and how that works. So I think sort of that early June time where I knew I was going to be playing quite well, I knew it wasn't going to last all year. So I had to then sort of end of July, beginning of August, I had to have a break and then come back to it for whenever the big tournaments were.
It's nice to hear that firsthand because I think many golfers struggle with that. But it's nice to hear even when you're up at your level, you still get that. So talk us through because I think I remember you growing up just incredible, shooting some crazy scores, and me being a couple of years younger in the county, you're always kind of like the role model, be more like Jamie Moul, just go and shoot 61 round purless on a casual Tuesday. But then when you turned pro, you, as we talked, you sort of had a challenge tour, and then you got on the European tour as well. Struggle Will thought you were going to be incredible on there. So I suppose personally reflecting on it now, what do you think you did well when you turned pro, and what maybe would you look at doing differently, whether it was that season particularly? I think let's start with that season particularly. Yeah,
as in the European Tour season.
Yeah, and I suppose your pro career. Yeah.
So yeah, turning pro, I think it's always that strange thing where you get, if you get in the Walker Cup, it's almost like expected that you then just step straight on the main tour, get all the invites and carry on. Doesn't necessarily work like that. I think so. We all went to tour school straight after that. Played all right at tour school. I think I got to finals but didn't make it through to get my card. So I challenged tour card straight off, which was great. Got a few invites. Actually, that worked quite well because I sort of played 2 or 3 seasons where almost just sort of found myself on the challenge tour a little bit, got grounded there, again started to understand how to schedule that best, because I think to start with you do just go chasing it, and I made that mistake as well, went sort of straight out, like play everything and just crack on, and it just got too much at a certain point. So again, first 2 seasons I kind of, instead of sort of getting my card straight away, it was more a gradual build up to get to where I wanted to get to. And then main tour wise, a little bit of that same thing. Even though I knew how I functioned and worked best, getting your card, it's like if you miss a couple of cuts, it's so tempting to then go, I should go and play next week. I can't turn that one down because I don't know if I'm going to get the following week. So there's a little bit of that, and in hindsight, that was probably a mistake. Chasing a couple, scheduling it. If you miss cuts, you think, I'll add one more. Mindset wasn't right when I went and played the next couple and didn't work. So yeah, there was a little bit of that. You've got to do a little bit of the chasing for it if you're not playing well. So it's a tough balance to find. But I think I'd have been slightly better off probably sticking to my scheduling and knowing what works for me as opposed to chasing.
And then you got to that point, I suppose, 2011, you had your win on the Challenge Tour.
Yeah.
If I've got my numbers right from research, you beat Brandon Grace was runner-up.
Brandon and
Jorge
Jorge
Campillo.
Campillo. Yeah, so it's them
Got
two.
65 in the last round.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not bad. So, at that point, is that when kind of things came together? You got your scheduling, you kind of felt comfortable on the challenge. What is the difference when you went from like Brab and Walker Cup to that? Do you think you changed as a player or had to change as a player?
I don't think I changed too much as a player then. I think I just stuck to what I knew, kept the processes pretty well the same. I feel like because the structure of the last few seasons of my amateur stuff was, I had that pretty well nailed down. I think I was confident in taking that into the pro game, so there wasn't too much of a changeover. And yeah, that then carried on into that. Again, just hit a nice purple patch at the right time. I think after my win in Italy, I think the following week was Switzerland. Followed that up with I want to say top 5. I'm not sure where it was. Second or third maybe. And then the week after that was back to the English Challenge, which was at my home club, Stoke-on-Avon. So it kind of just, the purple patch fell at the right time, where the third one in a row after a win and a top 5 was my home track. And I was like, okay, well, this feels really easy now. I could go and just play.
Was that both courses as well?
It was just over the Gainsborough, and again, another top 5. So I had sort of 3 events where it just sort of made the whole season. And it was like, okay, now if I can just play nice, consistent golf going in, going to go into the grand final in a pretty good spot and get my card off the back of that. So the purple patch came at the right time that season, but it was all kind of an accumulation of scheduling everything right and getting that prep right.
And then you had one full year on the European Tour after that. As a result, you got your card. The proper way to do it, grind your way through the Challenge Tour.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the right week on at tour school, fantastic. You play well there, straight on, job done. You'd probably choose to do it that way, but through the Challenge Tour, it is great because you know exactly what you've done for a whole season. You know, going into a full season main tour wise, you know what you need to do. You know how you can schedule that and go into the next season hopefully as confident as possible.
And then what about your year on the European Tour then? I'm guessing that was probably at the time quite exciting and stressful at the same time, of like, you've got this opportunity, but then just like you're saying, limited schedule, you really need to make a move. Yeah, what was that like?
Yeah, exciting to start with, and very quickly got stressful. It was, so the category I had, thankfully, was high enough that I knew I was going to get X amount or close to a full schedule for most of the year. I think if you finish 1 to 10, you get pretty much full playing rights. At that time, 10 to 20 was sort of, you get the first batch of events, but then you re-rank. Thankfully, I wasn't involved in the re-rank, so I knew that I was going to get a full season playing. First few events, great. Middle East swing, it's like, okay, this is proper step up from sort of Challenge Tour wise, where you're doing everything yourself and you fly into an airport, sort yourself out, they pick you up, they take you to the
Not nicking those range
allocated hotel. There was no problems there. It was the first few events are a bit like, this is fantastic, this is spot on, but you've got to go out there and perform. And I didn't. Well, sort of the first few events were very make cut, miss cut, make cut, miss cut. So it's a little inconsistent to start with, and then that's when I sort of stepped out of my schedule and my sort of routine, if you like, and that's probably where I started making some mistakes.
Start trying to sort of chase it and chase.
Started to chase it. Started to possibly then think about, do I need to make some technical changes here? Changes to my golf game to make this work. In hindsight, bad move.
Really? So what did you try and do? And I suppose what was the catalyst for that?
Thinking. So I went chasing a bit of distance. It was around that time where that was just starting to kick in, really. Obviously now it's huge, and that's what everyone is chasing and going for. Game's changed a bit since I had my card, even to now, 10, 12 years ago, but it was starting to get more of a bomber's game. Starting to see a bit of that. I felt like potentially to compete, I needed to add a bit more distance to my game, but that wasn't my game.
No, they're so interesting because I think if you look at it as the hardcore stats, I've actually got your stats up from that season.
Okay.
Yeah, whether they're correct or not, but this is going back to the archives. So
yeah,
the average driving distance apparently on the European Tour was 278, and you're at 276. So you're ranked 158 on that. And I think, when I think about that as like a performance coach, I'd look at that and go, that's an obvious win. You think 10 gains, so 10 yards extra is roughly like 0.1 strokes gains. You put that through like 14 drives, that's 1.4 shots, you're going to be better.
Yeah.
But the reality is, can you actually do that and keep everything else up? So was that what you sort of tried to do? But
so I knew I was around that average. I knew I was like middle of the road, bang average distance wise. Always had been. That had was not ever a strength in my game. I wasn't overpowering people. I wasn't overpowering courses. That was not what I did. My game was accuracy, distance control. Probably sort of at my best when the year before on Challenge Tour, distance control wise, like 2 or 3 yards, I was bang on. I was there. I knew exactly how far that thing was going, and that's why I scored well. It was then an element of, okay, main tour wise, I probably need to hit it a bit further to compete. I think had I have stuck to what I was good at and not tried to change my game to suit the surroundings, I think I could have kept my card for a number of years, but I don't think I would have necessarily competed and had a lot of sort of good finishes. It's that kind of thing where I could have had a longer career, I think, had I not have chased something. But I tried to make some changes, tried to be probably a little bit better in all areas, which I think that was probably the mistake that I made. And looking, that then sort of influences how I think people should attack their game now.
So we need to get onto that because I think that's a great vantage point. Just to say, like, we see this a lot. So Victor Hovland got slammed recently for trying to change it, but he came out and he goes, like, in my defense, I've done about 30 things to try and improve my game, and every single one of them has worked. Tried to do this one, it didn't, and went back. So I suppose what's your advice on that point for players and aspiring junior players who want to then go on to
So I think everyone has their strengths, weaker parts of their games, weaknesses, whatever you want to term them as. Yes, you want to be aware of them, but I don't think everyone needs to work on their weaknesses so much to make them strengths. You're always going to have strengths and weaknesses. And I think work on your strengths, but not at the detriment, the other way around. Work on your weaknesses, not at the detriment to your strengths. Your strengths will always be your strengths. I worked on trying to improve a weakness, but it was at detriment to my main strength. So I lost what I was really, really good at a little bit, only small margins, but I lost a bit of that in trying to get a bit more distance. I might have got a little bit more distance out of it, but I was hitting it in the rough more. My swing doesn't work out of rough I don't get out the rough very well, so I need to be in the fairway. So, I think not losing or having a good understanding of what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. You're not necessarily ever going to flip them round and make the weaknesses become your strengths. Just play the game to suit that. I think the better play you get, the better you are at doing that. I think you know what your strengths are. You know how you best navigate golf courses. So it's just get your strengths better and as good as you can.
And I think when you look at the players on tour, they have no real weaknesses. Similar to you, you weren't the longest, but it wasn't like a drastic weakness. But if you doubled down on your distance control and your putting, maybe you would have just sort of started to tweak up.
I think I could have kept my card comfortably had I not have lost a bit of the accuracy off the tee.
Yeah, because that is it. When I looked at your stats for that year, your fairways hit is 58%.
Yeah,
and you used to go some rounds where you probably barely missed it.
So sort of amateur days where I was particularly keeping a lot of stats, that was high 70s.
Yeah, I can imagine. You're unbelievable.
So that's a very big difference for me in the number of fairways that I'm hitting out of into greens. Like I say, I couldn't control it out the rough. On tour, the rough is much more penal than it is, and that's where I struggled. So
that's awesome. I think it's really good advice. So I suppose we're going to sort of move on to your coaching now and talk about putting, get geeky. But is there any more sort of, I suppose, advice for aspiring juniors who are thinking they're on the pathway at some point? What thoughts have you got for them? Is there anything else that they might not be aware of? I suppose a lot of people kind of think they know everything, but you've been through this journey.
Yeah, the key bit for me is compete as much as you can. So if you do well at county level, push yourself out of that comfort zone and go and compete regionally. Go nationally. Always go to as big a competition with as good a player as you can. Surround yourself with better players. Play with better players. Compete with them. Try and beat them. That's where I think you just got to surround yourself with better players and compete as much as possible. You can get it looking as good on the range as you like. You can chuck some brilliant TrackMan stats and numbers at things. If under the gun, when you got someone in front of you that you're trying to beat, you can't reproduce, it doesn't matter. So I think you just get out there and compete as much as possible.
That's so good. Superb. I suppose nice transition now, because I want to talk about what you do putting, and I love the practice side. So I think it's interesting to sort of talk about this and how you get ready for competing, how you reflect on this as well. But yeah, I suppose why did you sort of specialize in putting? I know you do other areas of the game. We've got a good friend between us who comes for you for short game lessons, and he just raves about how great you are, Jamie. Doesn't shut up. If Rich is listening.
Why putting? So short game putting was always a strength and an interest throughout my whole amateur career, and I was always most interested in that area, possibly because it was my favourite area to practice and play. I was confident in it. I kind of knew I was good at that. So I always wanted to focus my coaching on something specific. I think in the years after I lost my Challenge Tour card, started doing a bit of coaching. It was very much just, okay, I'm available for coaching. Everyone then comes for swing lessons. It's like, right, okay, fine. Just didn't interest me. So as much as I wanted to practice and play, because I was still trying to compete a bit at the same time. So I was trying to practice and do some lessons. And the days where I did a lot of swing coaching and stood on the range, didn't really enjoy it. If I'm being completely honest, I didn't enjoy just doing swing lesson after swing lesson after swing lesson. So I always wanted to try and gear my coaching towards the short game side of things. So I tried to do that a little bit to start with. And then probably 2 winters ago, kind of thought, okay, no, actually putting is the area that I'm most interested in. I wanted to get into something specifically. So I wanted it to be a bit more niche, a bit more specialised, because I think that's where I could separate myself a bit from other golf coaches around. There wasn't really anyone in the area doing too much putting specific. So yeah, decided to go down that route. Have a bit of an analytical, technical brain when it comes to that. So wanted to engage in that, like the geeky side of it. But on the flip side of that, also quite like the sort of artistry and feel side of that as well. So it's not all about the numbers for me. It's a bit of both. So I quite like that putting's got all that in. And also people don't really think about their putting. People think it's the last bit of the game they go to. It's the bit that, hey, stroke's only this long, can't make too many mistakes in that. It's the easiest part of the game. I mean, it's not at all.
My favourite thing about putting, we had a lot of people come through Exeter University who are incredible golfers, got down to +3, +4, but you look at their putting and you're like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
But many players, say I'm a streaky putter. No one says I'm a streaky ball striker.
No.
They say I'm inconsistent,
Yeah.
So if you're a streaky putter, something's wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
You're going to have days where you hole a lot more. But I really think that's one of those where the better your technique is, the better your understanding of pace control, green reading, the more consistent you become. So I suppose let's get into those elements. What are some common sort of themes you maybe see when you get, say, everyday club players and then maybe more elite players?
That streaky putter one is an interesting one, because you get a lot of people coming in and that's sort of their opening game. But always sort of first meeting, it's always like, okay, so explain your putting to me. What is your putting story? And like, streaky as hell. I'm like, okay, right. So straight away, basically, you're inconsistent.
Yep,
and it all depends on the putts you hit on the first 2 or 3 greens. If you miss a couple, you break down. If you hole a few, confidence is high and off you go. So it's that element of there's sort of the psychology of it. If you hole a couple early doors, you have a good day. And it's like, well, yes, then why? So you just let it happen. Whereas as soon as you miss one, not confident enough to then sort of understand why it's missed or fall back on some solid fundamentals, which is what most people don't have in there, because the putting's not talked about as much as the full swing and the fundamentals on that side. So for me, it's that thing there, and then it's stepping into each element of start line, pace control, green reading. It's like, which of them have you not got right?
And let's dive into that, because I think there's 2 points. People on the golf course, obviously, when they are unconfident, they leave putts short and they're never going to go in.
Yeah.
But I also think the stroke mechanics break down when people decel and have these patterns. So all of a sudden, your face can get shut, or lots of things can change in terms of like the dynamic loft through impact. So it's quite interesting to talk through that. So you use Capto, which I think is great. I've only used TrackMan. You used to use TrackMan because, again, I think these people forget that it's still to do with impact, and you've still got path, face, strike location to a certain point as well. But so what do you see? Do you have players who come that are streaky? What do you then see in their data?
The data shows that inconsistency. So it shows that it's generally a streaky putter will be someone that relies on a timing of some sort. So on any given day, when their timing's on, whether that be a release pattern or a tempo, if they find that and find something that they can then feel like they can trust and repeat, it works. But as soon as anyone's got that sort of technical thing that breaks down, and their mind then goes, I've just missed that putt left, I'm not going to miss left again, So, well, no, this one's obviously going right, and there's some technical issue in there that's going to make you do that. So they don't have something consistent to fall back on. And that's almost, a lot of the time, is a lack of understanding of what they're trying to do with the putter, how they're trying to move it, or why it's broken down. So I think that's what I always go back to is what are you trying to do with it, and why does it break down? What do you then need to go to make it better or make it more consistent? Because I always say as well, I mean, I'm pretty confident I can get people hitting better putts. Whether they go in or not, that's a whole different ball game. There's way more factors involved in it in just holding more putts. So I think to start with, you've got to get to the point where you're hitting consistently better putts to be able to then actually start holding putts. But then we bring green reading into it and all sorts of other areas as well.
I want to jump into that next. I want to just close this section. So when you see people with an inconsistent ability for start line, is it always just face and path? Is that the variation? Or is there anything else you look at as a coach where you're like, oh, that's all?
I think to start with, I possibly would have just looked at them points, but that's where I quite like Capto in the as the data it gives, it tells you exactly how that putter moves in sort of every dimension of the movement, every little piece of it. I think it gives something like 40 something parameters on how the putter moves. So anything that you want to know that putter does, we can see. So I like you using that to sort of see what areas are causing it. So yeah, not necessarily just face and path. Simplistic view, yes, you get the face and path right, it works. But almost delving into a little bit more of it as to see why, because we found actually the arc, so the up and down of the stroke can have a huge influence on the shape of the stroke visually from above. So there's a lot more involved in just sort of path can be influenced in the arc and how the putter moves and things like that. So that's where I get to geek out a bit and go into them areas. The players don't necessarily need to know it. If they're data minded, then great, they can hear what I'm thinking and saying, but a lot of people it'll just confuse the hell out of them. So
we know every golfers most of them are secret geeks, aren't they?
Oh,
If they listen
yeah.
to this, there will be tell me, Jamie, tell me more. So let's move on, because I really appreciate your time. I don't want to hold you too long, but I want to talk a little bit about green reading, because you're a phenomenal putter. One of the things that I think, again, when we talk about this like streakiness, is if you can't start the ball consistently on line, you never get feedback on whether your green reading was right or pace control. So whenever someone says they struggle with green reading, I always find that they're inconsistent in terms of start line. Really, as like a fundamental thing, and then you just can't learn. But what you do as you transition into green reading, is there anything that you find is really useful to work with people on?
I think what you said there was like really important, is you don't learn. I think a thing that I always work with people on, and possibly slightly more so when you get to better players, elite level players, is why did it miss? That's the key bit there, is if you don't know why it missed, you can't really improve it. And with sort of everyday players, everyday golfers, I think a lot of that I see in when they go and practice, they'll have 4 or 5 balls and they'll hit random putts at sort of a 15-20 foot hole. And it's like, okay, so what are you actually getting out of that? Because you're essentially rolling a ball down to a hole that is not very likely to go in, yet every time it misses, you will berate yourself for missing and think, okay, no, I need to aim left. But if you didn't aim it right in the first place, that's not the fix. So I think being very clear as to why a putt misses is the most important thing to improve that. So simple gate drill, where if you know you've found the gate, you know you've found your starting line, so you can eliminate that. Where the ball then ends proximity-wise to the hole, if it's 4 foot past, it was too hard, so the read is negated. If it's 4 foot short, same thing. The read is completely negated because you haven't found your pace. So I think you've got to take the variables out of it to then understand how green reading works and be able to piece them 3 things together.
I love that. And that comes back to that point. Yeah, feedback is key and how we do that.
Yeah,
It's interesting you got to that as a coach because I look at my own journey as like a golfer and I wasn't to your standard. But I got my putting and short game up to like probably good enough to earn some money and then long game awful. But I look at how I practice my putting and short game and I had these
yeah,
clear bits of feedback to understand start line, pace control.
yeah,
And I look at my long game, it's shocking. We didn't have TrackMan and things like that, but
yeah.
I was just stabbing in the dark. I really was. So
I
yeah,
think a lot of that kind of was the case. That's when coaches almost become you almost become more reliant on a coach 20 years ago than possibly what you are now, as in a coach, as in the person, because data can go. That's what it says. That's the result. It's fact. Whereas before it was a little bit like, okay, I'm trusting you to tell me what you see, how you see this, what's going to improve it. But yeah, probably more difficult back then to get that feedback on swing stuff as opposed to the putting stuff. Putting stuff, there's always ways of being like clarifying, is that right? A gate drill, a pace control drill, something like that.
I was going to
It's
say, just to
obvious.
wrap up, what are some of your favorite ways to practice putting for you and
Um,
you?
so for me is not having a hole too much. I'll always start people without a hole. So it will be along a stick through a gate. It's like, can you find that gate consistently? If you can, you know your starting line's good. So then we add distance control things to that element of it. So it's like little tick where it's always going to come back to them three things that you said: the start line, the pace control. Then you've got to add green reading to it. But I think if you can break down, if you can get people more confident that they can find their start line, that they can then take that away as an issue and be like, okay, I know my start line's good, so I can now just focus on, can I pace this ball how I want to pace it around the hole. So I think you've got to be very aware of them two elements to start with: the start line and the pace control, and then you can add green reading to it afterwards. I always find green reading is probably the third element, because the first two make the third work.
Yeah, but that is the pattern. If it's putting, we're going to link back to your long game, which you said you dialed down to like 2 to 3 yards. You could control where that golf ball went.
Yeah.
You hit it obscenely straight. So your ability to control start direction and face angle and spin was incredible for a long game. And so you're
Mm-hmm.
standing there just thinking, okay, can I hit this wedge 107? Whereas
Yeah.
I think most amateurs are thinking, can I not snap hook it in a bunker or
Yeah.
long,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But it's the same in putting, isn't it? It's you've got to work on those fundamentals before you then build the
Yeah.
layers on top.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um, that's awesome, Jamie. As I said, we've known you many years. First time we've ever chatted, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. Where can people find you if they want to reach out, get some putting lesson, just to come say hi and ask
Um,
you some questions? Where's best?
Instagram is probably the best place, Jamie.Moul. Try and keep that quite up to date with anything that's going on, and contact through there. So that would be the best place to get hold of me, and you'll see exactly what's going on.
Awesome, appreciate it. Thanks so much, Jamie.
Okay, cheers.